I'm here in the Southcrest community of San Diego to discuss the legacies of environmental inequality and the struggles for environmental justice in the late 20th century city. In September of 1981, readers of the San Diego Union opened their papers to discover a case of illegal dumping here on a vacant lot on Alpha Street behind me. Under the headline, "Toxic Waste Dumped Here," the Union described its discovery of, quote, "a dumping ground saturated with toxic chemicals, including suspected cancer-causing PCBs." The report depicted a vacant lot, strewn with barrels that were, quote, "reeking of pungent fumes, with soil so saturated that it could be exploded by a discarded cigarette." Shockingly, the site was just a block from St. Jude's School and Church, today Cristo Rey School and Church, and it was heavily used by local kids as a playground and as an access point to Choyas Creek, which is right behind me. A few days later, the San Diego Union reported a second toxic spill in nearby Barrio Logan. This time, barrels carrying a toxic liquid fell off of a truck and poured into an alley behind a barrel recycler. The owner, Charlie Pickert, 82, was cited for unsafe storage and handling of chemicals. Illegal dumping on Alpha Street and the alley spill off Logan Avenue exposed a wider reality of environmental danger lurking just beneath the surface of the post-World War II city. These incidents highlighted the environmental legacies of a post-war economy that operated with little regard to contamination, a toxic landscape that stretched from backyard sheds to bathroom cabinets through industrial outfalls, chemical smogs, and pesticide oversprays whose consequences were little recognized at the time. These events also exposed the social legacies of urban spatial inequality in a city like San Diego, the legacies of redlining and segregation, and the exposure of communities of color and working class communities generally to high rates of social and environmental disadvantage. Finally, the events of 1981 illustrate the roots of a growing political reaction, a grassroots movement for environmental justice that would swell across the United States in the years to come. In San Diego, the region's big money interests in maritime trade, industry, and national defense had deep roots around San Diego Bay. Adjoining these industries were blue-collar communities such as Logan Heights, Barrio Logan, and National City, which were home to Mexican, Chicano, and African-American families. Despite gains in civil rights and economic prosperity in the post-war era, residents contended with aging homes and infrastructure, permissive zoning that allowed industrial uses adjoining homes, and a shortage of parks and natural spaces. Further, they had only to listen, or to look up, or even to breathe, to experience the impact of urban highways in the midst of their community. Like working-class communities of color around the U.S., residents of Barrio Logan experienced rates of respiratory disease, childhood asthma, lead poisoning that were often twice the regional average. For some readers in 1981, the news of toxic hazards in Barrio Logan was not new at all. For Chicano activists, the incident reinforced the ongoing effort to protect the neighborhood from noxious neighbors, such as nearly 50 auto junkyards and recyclers that operated in the barrio. Other readers were alarmed as well. For Diane Takvorian, a social worker from Golden Hill, who had recently formed a coalition called the Coalition Against Cancer, reports of toxic dumping in Barrio Logan sparked a critical insight. Takvorian wrote, "It occurred to me that people were essentially being discriminated against with the use of these hazardous chemicals. Toxics were not merely an environmental issue, but they were a social justice issue." And she said, quote, "It was becoming clear that these increasing environmental problems were not going to be handled on a governmental level, and that communities would have to take the lead to protect themselves." In the context of the national concern with toxic waste that had been sparked by the incident at Love Canal in the late 1970s, Takvorian's coalition adopted a new name and a new mission. The new Environmental Health Coalition would engage in conscious political organizing to expose the hidden dangers of toxics and to achieve environmental justice and healthy communities for all San Diegans, with a particular focus on frontline communities of color like Barrio Logan. Since 1981, Environmental Health Coalition, working with public health officials and community organizations of all kinds, has taken leadership in a wider coalition fighting toxic chemical exposures in San Diego, in California, in the United States and in Mexico that continues to this day. About a mile from Alpha Street and just down Logan Avenue from the barrel recycler is Chicano Park. This iconic landscape at the heart of Barrio Logan was seized by community members for a park following construction of the Coronado Bridge above me in the 1960s, and it soon became a focus for community arts, history, and politics. It's home today to the largest collection of Chicano murals in the United States, and it's one of the largest outdoor expressions of community arts on Earth. A good example is here on the column just above me. A mural painted in 1977 reveals the concern with environmental justice that was emerging in communities of color like this one across the U.S. in the 1970s. A few years before the toxic dumping at Alpha Street, local activists had begun a campaign to shut down the noxious businesses in the community, with a particular focus on 48 Anglo-owned junkyards scattered throughout the neighborhood. Many of them were adjacent to homes, schools, and other community facilities. Uniting under the slogan Barrio Sí, Yunques No, community yes, junkyards no, activists with the Chicano Federation, with Barrio Station, with the Barrio Logan Residents Association, and other groups led protests against the Yunques and in favor of new urban planning that would separate industrial and residential uses and protect neighborhood residents from toxic exposures. Young muralists working with Victor Ochoa of the Chicano Federation gave voice to this demand to the activist politics in the community with this mural behind me. Since then, some of the Yunques have moved away, but the struggle remains. A number of the largest junkyards are still operating. Commercial interests led by the Port District and the major industries have blocked efforts to redraw the community plan in a way that would protect residents from industrial wastes and byproducts. Gentrification has put pressure on the affordable housing stock. Meanwhile, the community continues to contend with fumes and particulate pollution from the thousands of cars overhead on the Coronado Bridge and I-5 right next door, not to mention from the idling trucks by the port, the trash trucks, and a range of paint shops, chrome platers, and metal shops scattered throughout the residences of the community. Barrio Logan remains a community on the front lines of the struggle of environmental justice. It's a place that reveals the obstacles and also the opponents to achieving this goal. But it's a place that reveals, too, the commitment and the politics and the history of the struggle of the community to achieve that end. Barrio Logan and the ongoing struggle for environmental justice in the 21st century city.